I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome back. I'm Keith Green, and I'd like to welcome you to the afternoon session of our Winter Summit. I thought the morning, and from the feedback that I've gotten from you guys, was that the morning component was really very, very good and very strong. So my goal is that for the afternoon session to be equally as strong, and I'm certain that it will be. I am very pleased to share this panel with an old friend and a new friend. My old friend is Michael Davis. He is at Calvert, and my new friend Sean will introduce him to you. I met Michael in a previous life, and he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Employee Benefit Security Administration. But first, I'd like to introduce my new friend, Sean Davis. And the Davises are not related.
At least we don't know that.
Sean will be the moderator of this discussion. She's a Securities Compliance Examination Lead and Senior Accountant in the SEC's Office of Credit Ratings. She's responsible for leading and conducting securities compliance examinations of U.S. and international, nationally recognized statistical rating organizations. I have to read this because I could never say this quite right otherwise. To assess and promote compliance with statutory and commission requirements. Sean also serves as co-chair of the SEC African American Council, one of the SEC's employee resource groups. She previously served as the key academic advisor for the professional practice group in the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant. In this capacity, she worked closely with SEC staff and the PCAOB to assess and evaluate existing auditing standards and proposed rules, and assisted with specific resolutions of auditor and preparer independence and ethical matters that were brought to the attention of the Commission. Prior to joining the SEC, she served as a full-time business school faculty member for more than 15 years and taught accounting, auditing, economics, and finance courses to corporate executives, executive MBA and MBA students, and undergraduate students. She has held faculty appointments at Emory University in Atlanta, Washington University in St. Louis, just to name a few schools. She earned her PhD in accounting with a concentration in economics from Washington University, an MBA and Master's of Science in Accountancy from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and her BBA in Business Administration from Jackson State University. So I am happy to have Sean moderate this panel for us. So I'll go sit next to her.
Thank you, Keith, for that wonderful introduction. I think sometimes I sound better on paper than in actuality, but I do appreciate that, and I welcome this full audience for the participation to look at the state of African Americans and retirement. I would just like to begin by just going over some of the few statistics, and then I'll have, of course, our panelists to go more in depth with regard to the latest research and findings and to give their overall perspective on the state of African Americans and retirement. So although as African Americans we have made tremendous progress in terms of our financial wherewithal, we're still confronted with many, many challenges. And therefore this panel will focus on all of the latest research and provide their insights into looking at the African American community, and also talk about some of the complex issues that have arisen with regard to the African American retirement investor as well as the financial service industry. Just for some initial statistics, some of the studies have shown that African Americans tend to have a significant shortfall in their retirement assets, and thus a greater dependency on Social Security benefits than the general population. Also, this is coupled with greater levels of unemployment, and this is extremely important as we look at our younger youth between the age of 16 and 19. They actually have an unemployment rate that is 393% higher than the national unemployment rate. That's outstanding. That's definitely a critical issue there. We also have a tendency to have fewer access to employee-sponsored retirement plans, a greater tendency to go through hardship withdrawals and also cashing out of our 401k accounts, and less likely to own stocks and bonds in mutual funds. In addition, we're also the eaters of the senior sandwich. If you never heard about the senior sandwich, that is where we are not only taking care of our children and grandchildren, but also are taking care of our elderly parents. And so we're honored to have two distinguished panelists and experts in the field of retirement to talk about these issues in more detail. So I'm honored to begin introducing, starting with my right, Keith Green. Keith is the founder and president of the American Retirement Initiative, and he is the guy behind this wonderful summit that is very, very critical for the African American community. Keith's organization, the Retirement Initiative, facilitates best practice sharing, provides thought leadership, focusing on employer-sponsored retirement plans and the retirement landscape in the U.S. In his earlier career, Keith worked as an institutional consultant for TIAA-CREF and then joined Aetna Financial Services as its regional director in the Michigan office. Then he ultimately became vice president for his southeastern region. After ING's acquisition of Aetna Financial Services in 2000, Keith became the senior vice president of strategic marketing and the senior vice president of domestic emerging markets. He was then appointed the Senior Vice President and Executive on loan to Hemisphere, an organization that was tasked with bringing the headquarters of the free trade area of Atlanta, and he spent much of his time during this in Latin America and also the Caribbean capitals, where he promoted trades and worked with economic development issues amongst diplomatic leaders and elected officials. In January of 2006, Keith was appointed Senior Vice President of Government Relations for ING, and he held that responsibility until 2011 when he founded the American Retirement Initiative. So thank you, Keith, for joining us today. Next, I would like to welcome and introduce Mr. Michael Davis. Michael is the Director of Institutional Sales for Calvert Investments. There he is responsible for growing the company's client base, focusing on corporate pension foundations and endowments and other institutions to help grow their sales and assets. Before joining Calvert, Michael served as a senior vice president and head of the stable value business at Prudential Retirement, where he headed Prudential's in-plan and third-party stable value product management and development team. Prior to that, he has great government experience. He serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Labor within the Employee Benefits and Security Administration during President Obama's first term. There he assisted the Assistant Secretary in the management of the agency's responsibility for ERISA regulatory enforcement activities on a nationwide basis. He also held a variety of other roles with J.P. Morgan and Chase & Company, starting out as an investment banker in New York and ultimately serving as the managing director and head of the West Region Institutional Group. He was responsible for institutional sales efforts across much of the U.S. So thank you, Michael, for joining us. And one last thing I would like to mention with Michael, Michael also was named one of the 75 most powerful blacks on Wall Street by Black Enterprise. So thank you for joining us. To kind of outline this format, what we will do is allow each of our panelists to take 10 minutes or so to give their prepared remarks. Then I will follow up with an engaging session to kind of ask some questions that are critical to the African American community and the African American investor. And then we'll open it for a Q&A session with our audience. So thank you. We'll start with Michael.
Well, thanks so much for being here. I am honored to be a part of this panel. You said you were honored. It's actually my honor to be affiliated with folks like this and of such accomplishment. Keith Green is not only the founder and organizer of this, but he's also a friend. And I salute the work he's doing. I think it's important work. And I think there are retirement issues that are unique to people of color that we need to be very attentive to. Prior to joining the Obama administration back in May of '09, when I was at J.P. Morgan, I was very active with the firm's black leadership activities at the firm. And there was a lot of work we were doing externally to really promote financial literacy. So one of the things that we came to be convinced about was that financial literacy can really make a difference. Whether we like it or not, we live in an environment where we are being asked to shoulder more investment responsibility than ever before. Our parents, in a lot of cases, worked in jobs where they had a pension. That pension was a scheme that the employer assumed the investment risk. The worker got a stream of payments over time. There's a lot of data to suggest that that payment stream and that reliability and that risk allocation with the employee not really owning the risk provides for tremendous retirement security for those individuals. And when I think about my own parents, my mother's a teacher, my father's a postman, was a postman, they both have retired. My father now is a full-time pastor of a church in Dallas, in Texas, and you may hear some of that cadence. I'm not going to preach today, but you may hear some of that cadence in my own voice. I got to see his relative retirement security, and I'm from the South too, so we talk slow. But I got to see the relative retirement experience he had from the post office versus what he gets as pastor of a church, which in many cases, if you are close to the church, and I do see a member of my own church here today, always honored to be in his presence, and you see I'm not cussing, so you can tell him on Sunday. I don't cuss on Mondays or Tuesdays or Wednesdays. I'm the same. But I saw, with a lot of ministers, they really don't have, particularly in the black church, they really don't have a pension that they get. In some cases, a hand-to-mouth existence. And for a lot of the churches, you see a lot of ministers that really preach until they pass away because there is no retirement, right? So just seeing what he gets there versus what he got at the post office is just sort of a study in contrast. So I think that this issue is one of great significance for us because we tend to be disproportionate with respect to poverty in old age, right? So we tend to be overrepresented of those who are impoverished in old age, and part of that is because they don't have the retirement security that they really need. So when we think about the issues that sort of drive retirement security, I sort of break them down into three categories. One is coverage, two is adequacy, and three is payout. I think the coverage issue is one of the most significant for people of color. This is true of African Americans and Hispanics. Now, if you look at Asians, in a lot of cases, you see coverage levels and adequacy levels that mimic or even exceed those of whites. So what you see with respect to African Americans and Hispanics is, in this first case, coverage levels that are much lower than they are for whites. So just a few statistics, and this is just an introductory, so I'm not going to overload you with a lot of numbers. But just to give you a little contextual view here. The National Institute of Retirement Security did a study recently, and they looked at sort of this contrast sort of by race, and what they found is 54%, about half of African Americans have access to a employer-sponsored retirement plan. That means that half do not, right? If you look at the Hispanic population, only 37% of Hispanics have access to an employer-sponsored plan, and you know that in this country, the overwhelming majority of people who have any retirement savings get it through their employer. I think the numbers are upwards of 80%. So if you don't get coverage through your employer-sponsored plans, in a lot of cases, you do not have coverage, which means that you do not have retirement savings, which means that you end up working a lot longer in your life. In a lot of these cases, the people that are working in these jobs are working in jobs that there's a physical component required. So let's say you might be a waitress, you could be a maid, you could be a house cleaner. If your health starts to deteriorate, you start having trouble walking, you can't stand for those long periods of time, and you don't have the retirement security that a lot of the low-wage jobs don't have, you really are in a world of hurt, which starts to create some context for why people of color tend to be overrepresented with respect to poverty and old age. The differences in coverage tend to be more pronounced in the private sector than they are in the public sector. And having worked in the public and the private sector, I saw those differences as well, right? So you sign up day one to be an employee in the public sector, and I got immediate access to the TSP plan, the Thrift Savings Plan. The Thrift Savings Plan is the government version of 401k. It is the largest defined contribution plan in the world. I will tell you it's one of the best run plans I've ever seen, and I've covered the biggest blue chip private sector plans in the country, and I'm familiar with a lot of plans around the world. It's one of the best, right? But as a public, sort of a government employee, U.S. government employee, you get access to it. I will tell you, just personally, speaking personally, I left my money in that plan. So when I left the federal government, I'm still trying to find ways to roll other money into it. I wish I could roll my house into it, I tell you. It is absolutely extraordinary, and one of the reasons it's extraordinary is because they have the power of large numbers, right? So what I mean by that, because it's the largest defined contribution plan, they can exact great concessions from their providers from a fee standpoint, right? And fees eat directly into your returns. The higher the fees are, the more money comes out of your pocket in terms of returns. So knowing that, and knowing what I know about how asset management works, I'm very impressed with the plan. But most people don't have access to it. A lot of people also have access to a defined benefit plan, right? So I think most people now have access to FERS if you are there for a long enough period of time. Most people in the private sector no longer have access to a defined benefit plan. So the numbers I saw for overall coverage for defined benefit were about 21% of the total population have access to a defined benefit plan. I am not here to pick winners or favorites, DB versus DC. I will, however, say that the data suggests that people who get streams of income that are based on a percentage of the salary they made while they were employed tend to do very well. They don't own the investment risk. They don't have to make the investment decisions, and financial literacy is not a headwind in that case. In the defined contribution context, if you are educated to make these decisions, you can make the good decisions. The problem is that there's a significant gap in financial literacy. I would say there's a significant gap in literacy, period. But when you look specifically to financial literacy, it tends to be a huge gap for people of color, African Americans, Hispanics. And one of the things we were looking at when I was at Morgan was how do we close that gap? The data suggests, and we had these conversations when I was in the administration, that you got to start young. You got to get people when they're young. You got to make it part of their education. It should be taught in schools. It should be taught at boys and girls clubs. It should be taught at churches. It should be taught at any place that young people congregate. And one of the things we were looking at is a partnership with the boys and girls clubs where we will provide a literacy component at those clubs. Because in some cases, in some respects, you have to go to where people are. You can't expect them to come to you. So if you hang out a shingle and say, hello, I'm this great financial firm, you cannot expect that people are going to line up at your door and sign up. That is true not only of young people. I would say that's also true of adults. And one of the things we did when I was in administration, we did these retirement seminars around the country where we partnered with historically black colleges and universities. So we did a big one at Spelman. We did some work with Howard. We did a variety of things. And there were a lot of people that did show up. But I would look to see how many people would actually ask for resources, how many people would actually follow up, how many people. And in every case, it was about 10 to 20% of the people who followed up. And you'd see, you hear stories about, look, you know, this stuff is so important. I'm working to help my parents, you know, figure out their financial wherewithal. I need help. I don't know where to go. But it was a minority of the group that would show up. Most people just don't do it. I almost liken it to medicine, where people almost feel like there's a blind spot with respect to a diagnosis they get. So if you go to your doctor and they diagnose you with a malady that you've never heard of, in most cases you don't tend to ask for a second opinion. Now we have Google, so people are a little bit more educated than they have been about these medical diagnoses. But in a lot of cases, people, they hear what they're told. Maybe they hear something from a friend, a relative, a neighbor, and they take that as being fact. Somebody says, I got this great stock idea for you. You go out and buy it, and you expect that that's going to be your financial wherewithal. I would tell you that that is not the way. That is absolutely not the way. The way to do it is asset allocation across a variety of different asset classes, but most people don't know that. And how would you know it? Because you haven't been taught it in schools. And if you think about where do you get your financial education, so those of you who have this knowledge, in a lot of cases it wasn't school, right? It may be a job that you had, it was a advisor or something, but it's not systemic across the country, right? So there's not a systemic way that people get this education and knowledge, yet you are being asked to make these decisions, so it's a collision. You don't have the knowledge. You've been asked to make the decisions. There's a disconnect already. Adequacy, real quick. So now moving on to just if you have access to a plan, are you saving enough? 62% of African Americans, this is again according to National Institute of Retirement Security data, have no retirement assets. 62%. Now that does not include defined benefit assets. This is just retirement savings, 401k, 403b, yada, yada. A subset of that group does have defined benefit, but as I said a minute ago, that is a smaller percentage, right? And I didn't say, but Latinos have an 11.7% coverage when it comes to defined benefit plans. They are the lowest socioeconomic group that has coverage. Tends to be because of the type of jobs that they are in, right? 69% of Hispanics have no retirement savings. That compares to 36% of whites. 3/4 of African Americans have less than $10,000 saved in retirement savings. 80%, let's say that again. So 75% of African Americans have less than $10,000 saved in retirement. 80% of Hispanics have less than less than $10,000 saved for retirement. Only 48% of whites have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. According to an ING study, African Americans and Hispanics had the lowest median balances saved for retirement. That is supported by an Ariel Hewitt study. It's actually a second landmark study they did where they actually looked at live data in retirement plans. African Americans, Hispanics, lowest. And I would say whites had between 4 and 5 times the amount of retirement savings that African Americans and Hispanics had, respectively. Prudential did a study in this space, and as you heard, I worked for Prudential, and they found the same thing, that the savings rates for African Americans in terms of median balances tended to be very low, even when correcting for income, right? So if you wanted to say that this is an income-driven conversation, it's not. So when you correct for income and age, you still saw lower balances for African Americans and Hispanics. One of the reasons for it is the leakage for African American populations was much higher. We take more loans, we take more hardship withdrawals, we cash out more often. The numbers were highest for African American women of all the demographic groups in terms of people of color with respect to loans and hardship withdrawals. Now, a lot of this is driven by immediate need, and this was also supported in the Prudential study. That people had immediate needs, emergency needs that they had. There also were higher incidences, particularly within the African-American populations, on loans that they gave to family members. So for African Americans giving loans, that incidence was much higher than it was for whites and also for Hispanics. Debt, this is according to the Prudential study, was the biggest financial concern that they had. The biggest concern that whites had was retirement savings. So what you tend to see is a need for immediate challenge, right? Not a need for me, but a set of immediate challenges that African American families and Hispanic families had, made more acute by what happened in 2008. So the retirement savings that was there, if it was there at all, was being used to satisfy those immediate needs. The money, however, hardly ever gets back. So once the money comes out of the account, it does not get back in most cases, which means that if you're starting from a small base already, you're taking money out of it, and you're having to work longer, that money is just not working. And one of the things that we were looking at also when I was at Prudential is just the gender dynamic, right? So women tend to outlive men by an average of 5 years. They tend to make less, 80 cents on the dollar. I think it was around 77 cents on the dollar that men made. And so their money had to work harder, but they were starting from a smaller base. And then you had rates of divorce. Women were responsible for the kids. So that dynamic is one that we're not even talking about today, but it is a very pronounced dynamic, and it's particularly acute for African American women. So that is the picture. Now, the good news is that automatic enrollment has helped, right? So if you work for a private sector company, the fact that many of these companies are going to automatic enrollment, that has really helped to close the gap, that if you have access, you now participate in a plan. The other thing, if you're in the public sector, you tend not to see the big differences in terms of the median balances. There are still differences, but they're not as pronounced in the public sector as they are in the private sector. The other thing is that you heard the president talk about the MyRA. That's the My Retirement Account that is meant to help close a coverage gap. Now, you can save up to $15,000 in the vehicle and then roll it into a traditional IRA. but that's meant to address the coverage gap. There's also, I would say, some interesting things that we came across when I was in the administration at the state level. So state of California has a retirement bill that has passed. They have more work they have to do on it that would create a mandatory system in the state of California that if you don't have access to an employer-sponsored plan, you would be opted into a scheme run by the state government that would allocate a certain amount of your money into it. The employer could kick in some money as well, but it would be compulsory. That compulsory nature is something that is happening around the world. When I was in the Labor Department, we were looking at things at countries like Australia and UK, where they were tending to do these compulsory arrangements where everybody in the country got something. But the view was you had to make it compulsory or people just would not voluntarily opt into it. So with that, I've probably taken way too much time. I apologize for it. But that, in a nutshell, is some of the data that we've looked at.
No, no, thanks, Michael. I, for some years, oh, you're right. Thank you. I'll be wondering why nobody nods or anything after a while. I want to follow up on some of the things that Michael said. There was a period where I headed up multicultural marketing for ING, and one of the things that we found, we did lots of different studies of different ethnic groups, and when we looked at African Americans in retirement, I mean, there were things that were obvious. You know, balances were significantly lower. There were more loans. But one of the things that we found, and we did a survey of many folks, we found that when there was something implemented that helped one single group, then ultimately ended up helping everybody. Everything that, for example, one of the things that I saw the other day that just really struck me was a headline, and it's about the same NIRS study. America's hidden retirement crisis is racial. And, you know, it obviously it was something I was familiar with, but it really struck me. And the lead researcher on the project said, if nothing changes, the future for people of color is frightening. And I think that's about right. I'm not a researcher, but I looked back just over the course of my career. I began my career as a retail broker, and the majority of my clients at that time were African American. So I began my career serving the African American market. And one of the things that was very clear is that from a financial literacy standpoint, we're very far behind. Financial education wasn't something that was institutionalized in our families in the same way as they were with folks with other groups. And one of the things that became clear as I got to my mid-20s and even close to 30 is that people who are similarly educated or may not be as educated as you are still know so much more because of the institutional family history that they may have. If you have parents or grandparents who are active investors and who taught you at a pretty early age about the importance of investing, there is no substitute for that. No amount of academic preparation is really going to substitute for real life history and real life preparation for that. So that's key. Part of it is about changing culture. You heard what Michael said a few minutes ago about even when you adjust for income and even when you adjust for education, the things that you think would normalize everything, everything isn't the same. There's still some differences. So I think it's really important for us to dig at why those differences exist, and when recognizing that they do exist, look at what we need to do to change that. There was an article, and there's this U.S. News and World Report money writer, Emily Brandon, who I look at and read from time to time because I find some of the things that she said was pretty interesting. But she was talking about the 3 critical elements of successful saving, and I want to talk about that. She said, if you can answer these 3 questions, your chances for having a successful retirement are going to be pretty great. One was a question about just calculating interest. If you have $100 and you earn 2%, what do you have at the end of a year, A, B, or C? A significant number of all Americans got the wrong answer. And the base was 100. You know, it wasn't like, what, 57.6, you know? So that's troubling. One of the questions factored in inflation. And then the last question was specifically about investments, whether a stock is less volatile than a stock mutual fund. This goes back to not only financial literacy, but just education in general. If in our population, math scores are lower to the point where you know, it's not relevant. If we don't have the basics, it's hard to apply more complex topics on top of it. So when we look at solutions to some of our problems, I mean, ultimately, a lot of it has got to be focused on K through 12. I know that's not the subject of this conversation, but education for us is going to be critical. Financial literacy education within our schools is also critical. And we were talking about family. Mike was talking about family. I'm from Detroit, and my dad worked for GM for almost 40 years. And any of you who have spent any time in Detroit, even if you've flown over it and didn't land, knows that Detroit is a union town. It is a union town. And everybody worked for an auto or a supplier of an auto or was affiliated with an auto in some way. So defined benefit plans just ruled everything there. So this conversation to a Detroiter 10 years ago, 20 years from now, would just be foreign because everybody had a defined benefit plan. The changes that we see even there in that community are pretty unsettling. So although much of this is have been sort of unprepared and there are things that we need to do differently, a lot of it is just that really the growth of defined contribution plans in some way has sort of been an earthquake where you know, when we've been standing and are kind of shaken by it because so much more is demanded of us than was demanded before. You know, in 1970, you woke up, you went to work, you worked there for 30 years, you came out. Yes, you had to manage your supplemental savings. So if you felt that your underlying pension wasn't enough, there were things that you needed to do. Obviously now the foundation has to be managed. Not only does the foundation have to be managed, but when you retire, I mean, while you're working to accumulate it, but even on the distribution phase, that's another set of tasks that you have to do to make sure that the money that you've accumulated lasts for the rest of your life. So financial literacy is something that we really can't emphasize enough. Sean, I know you've had a bunch of questions that you want to ask.
Yes, so thank you very much. I will go ahead, I think for time's sake, I will go ahead and ask what I consider some urgent questions to be answered. One of those have to do with, and I'll ask this for Michael, what advice would you give or what would you suggest to increase the level of retirement saving amongst the African American community in light of the fact that we are more reliant upon Social Security and also supporting our families?
Well, I think, and to Keith's point, I think that the rules that work for us work for everybody. So I don't think the rules sort of stop at the boundaries of this audience. I think that the rules of finance would suggest that you have to start early and don't take the money out. So if there's two things that you remember from my diatribe is start early, even if it's a small amount. I think the habit of saving is one that is tremendous. And once you get in the habit of saving, you can always enhance when resources are increased. But the power of compounding is, I would say, a power greater than kryptonite. Superman would have trouble with it because that money starts to work for you. So you put the money in, you start to earn interest on it, you earn interest on that interest. But if you wait and you say, I'm not going to start today, I'm going to wait and start, tomorrow or the day after that, you're losing. You're losing ground every day, right? So starting early. And then for everybody, again, don't think of the retirement savings pools as savings. Think of them as retirement. And, certainly since people don't have access to defined benefit plans, in most cases, 4 out of 5 cases, they're not going to have a defined benefit pension. So your retirement savings is it, that and Social Security. So if you take that money out, as I said, the odds and the numbers suggest that money is likely not to get back in. So I would say that use your 401k as a pool of loan assets as the last possible option. Now, I was on a panel with Michelle Singletary not that long ago, and Alicia's already laughing, and she's terrific because she just breaks it down. And she tells a story about just her kids and how, she talks about, because a lot of people, and this is true for African Americans, a lot of the loans that were taken out of 401ks were used to pay college tuition. Used to pay for kids, and she just tells a very funny story about talking to her kids. Like, you are going to a school that we can afford. Now, you can go to any of these schools as long as it's these top 3 that we can afford, because, and to her point, she's absolutely right? Because while, a child does have options with respect to colleges they go to, you don't really have an option with respect to your retirement savings. So you really want to be thoughtful about the purposes that you think that money is for, and really designating it for its intended purpose, which is to provide you some level of retirement security. The other thing, we didn't mention this, and I'll shut up, is African Americans in the research that we've seen, this is true in the Prudential study, I've seen it borne out in other studies, tend to be more conservatively invested than other demographic groups. They tend to be concentrated in cash. In short-term very short-term fixed income, like treasury bonds, treasury notes. And if you look at the rates of return of those types of assets relative to, notwithstanding what happened in the equity markets yesterday, but if you look at, yesterday was a rough day, right? But now, now I'll say this, if you panicked yesterday and you pulled your money out, you locked in those losses, right? So I'm telling you, you got to ride it out, right? There's going to be a choppy year, but look at what the equity market did last year, right? Almost 30% in the S&P, right? If you were not participating in that 30% run-up, you missed a lot. And if you missed it, you were probably sitting in something like cash, short-term CDs, where you were making maybe 1% if you were lucky. So you gave up almost 30% to people who were investing in the markets. But if you look at the data, African Americans and Hispanics, but especially African Americans, seem to be more conservatively invested. You have to be asset allocated. You have to have assets across the board. I personally do think that target date funds have been a great innovation in retirement, where it's automatically invested, it's automatically diversified, and it automatically rebalances and gets more conservative over time. So I can't say enough about starting early and investing appropriately. So wait, you guys have questions about it? What is target? Okay. Let me define. Yeah, I'm glad you guys. That's good. So a target date fund is a fund that is got a variety of different asset classes. So most people think, okay, you got fixed income, which is bonds, right? They pay a stream of income, a coupon payment, right? So you might own a bond that pays 5% or 7% or 3% or whatever, but it's a stream of income and it's predicted, right? You know what it is. Equity is you own a share of a company, and the value of that share goes up and down. So you saw the market yesterday was down 325 points. People took some economic data to suggest that companies aren't going to be doing as well this year in the U.S., and they took a big haircut from the valuation of those companies. You have more risk with stock, but you also have more opportunity for return. Some people, what they do is they invest in one asset class, right? They say, okay, well, my neighbor told me I need to be in bonds. Is there a bond fund at my company? I'll put all my money in the bond fund. Target date funds don't let you do that. What a target date fund says is this target date fund has a date that is set, and you want to pick the date that's closest to your retirement date. So you'll see a target date fund that might, if you have these in your plan, they might say 2020 fund or 2025 or 2030. What you are supposed to do is you're supposed to pick the target date fund whose date is closest to your intended retirement date. Because what that fund is doing is it's got a mix of bonds, debt, fixed income, and equity in it, and probably some other asset classes, right? But what happens is when you buy the fund, it's going to have a lot of equity. It's going to have a lot of risk. Let's say you're 25. But as you get closer to retirement, the percentage in that targeted fund that's equity is going to fall. The percentage that is going to be in more predictable assets, more conservative assets, is going to increase. So you start when you're 25 in a target date fund, and let's say it's got a 40. Let's say it's year 2000, you buy a 2040 fund, right? So you're going to retire at age 65. When you buy that fund in year 2000, it's going to be 80–90% equity, right? Very risky, but you want to have that risk because you want to grow your assets. But as you get closer to retirement, that 2040 date, it's going to be almost all fixed income. Very predictable, because as you get closer to retirement, you don't need all that risk anymore. You want to know what you're getting, right? You don't need to be taking. So it might be 10% equity, right? But you still will have some equity, because here's the other thing. You're going to live longer in retirement than your predecessors. So that money's got to work another 20, 30, some cases 40 years. So they're not going to take you out of equity entirely in most of these funds. They'll keep in a little bit of equity, give you a little bit of a bounce, but it's going to be most of it. And that asset allocation changes automatically over time. You don't have to do a thing. It does it automatically. And I say that is an innovation, because most people have not had the financial literacy to make those kinds of decisions, and having it automatically done for them, I think, is going to add value for most people.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Next, along the lines, let's talk a little bit about health care. So as we're living longer, being healthier, is there any type of relationship between health care costs and our readiness for retirement? And I'll ask that to Michael.
Actually, well, start with Keith.
Let me start with Keith.
Well, we have and Barbara and Patrick are going to talk about that a lot in the healthcare session that's coming up. But absolutely, healthier. It's far less expensive to be healthy, than it is to be sick. A, your medical costs are going to be lower. B, you can work longer. When you're healthier, you can work longer. You can earn more. You can save more. And increased health costs are taking money that could be used for other things away and diverting them into things that aren't income producing assets. So certainly retiree health costs are going to be really, really important and significant. Not only as health care impacts, or your health impacts your quality of life at wherever age you are, but the costs associated that will. So it's something we're going to talk about in great depth later on, but the short answer is yes, exclamation point, exclamation point. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about financial literacy, so I have a question for you, either Keith or Michael, to kind of talk about what could the K-12 public education or even higher education do to help with this problem, to help out in terms of the financial literacy. The statistics show that we're more faith in terms of getting our education and reaching out to church. What advice do you have for the higher education in K through 12?
Okay. You can kick it off.
So I think churches can play a role, because churches do, and this was borne out in the Prudential study and other studies I've seen, that African Americans are more likely than the overall population to get information from their church, to have the church as a social mechanism as well as a religious mechanism. And I think that there's something churches can do there. I think that, again, I think you want to start early. So you think about Sunday school that teaches about church. Think about Sunday school or Saturday school for financial literacy. Studies also show that to the extent you can make it more tangible for kids, it helps. So the Ariel Foundation has something I think is really interesting. They have a charter school in Chicago where they teach financial literacy in the school as part of the curriculum. But I think the most interesting part of what they do is they give the kids live money, real money, right? So when they get to high school, I think that each class got, I don't know if it still is, used to be $25,000 each class, and they'd manage it. Or maybe it's not that high anymore. I don't know. Maybe it's 10. But anyway, it's real money is what it is. But they make the decisions, right? So early on, the kids get these, so if you make good investment decisions, you get more apples. And they draw pictures and, you got 5 apples today. But as you get older, they translate the apples into real monetary value. And they say, you made X amount. But what I think is a kicker is when you actually make those investment decisions. I personally think that's the kind of thing that should be in every school in America. And we would have these conversations with the Department of Education, right, about things that they could do to encourage states to adopt it nationwide. But I think that to the extent that people are going to have to own this responsibility in this country, that we have to couple that with the literacy to go alongside it, or else we have set up a policy problem for ourselves where we've asked people to assume responsibility for which they have not been trained. And if you think about the work that you do at your job, when you do a new job, you get training for the job. It is most unfortunate when you get in situations where you don't get it. And this is as important a public policy issue as I can envision. And I just feel like where we are today, we have not been adequately trained for it.
And when you look at churches, for example, in the African American community, church is state. We talk about separation of church and state. Church really is state in the African American community. And along with that comes a lot of credibility and a lot of sort of historical infrastructure. So when you look at the institutions over which we have direct control, churches may well be the very best ones.
Another question I would like to ask has to deal with in terms of, do you see any commonalities in terms of the retirement challenges amongst African Americans and Hispanics?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you mind talking about some of those?
No, absolutely. When you look at the numbers, it's all a matter of degree. And when you look at the issues behind what some of our biggest problems are, if we're looking at companies that are not companies that don't offer retirement plans. One of the challenges that we have in terms of retirement plan participation is that many African Americans and Hispanics work for places that don't offer retirement plans. The data tracks, in almost every study, the data tracks each other. It's simply a matter of severity in each instance. So are there similarities? Yeah, there are similarities, and they're not quite identical, but they're almost identical. It tends to be a matter of severity, both on the good side and on the bad side, in terms of purchasing power, in terms of real advancements made by African Americans and Hispanics. We see a lot of the positive trends attract each other, but also some of the challenges. The NRS study says, the growing, retirement crisis is racial. And when they said it was racial, they didn't mean just African Americans. They meant African Americans and Hispanics as well. And for each statistic, the numbers were not that far off from each other.
I agree exactly with Keith. I think that the more interesting dynamic is gender, is men versus women. And for African Americans, most of our households are headed by women. And as I said a minute ago, women tend to outlive men on average by 5 years, and this is true across race. So for women who, as I said, are earning less than men, in a lot of cases, if you look at the data, less money, and it has to work harder because they're going to live longer, right? So I think the gender differences are even more intriguing and more compelling. And I would encourage all of my sisters, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, be very focused on your retirement security, because it is a very, very big issue.
I was speaking with someone. She worked with, she leads a financial planning group, and she said to me, men die married, women die alone.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that made lots of sense, whether it's through death of a spouse, whether it's through divorce, whether a woman is never married. In general, the rule is that men die married, women die alone.
Yeah. Really good statement.
Okay, I just have one more question, then we'll open it up for the audience for questions. I think we have 15 minutes over a little bit since we started a little late. Right now, the statistics show that financial advisors are less likely to reach out to the African American community. So where can we go for information? If we have our financial questions, where do we go?
I don't think financial advisors are necessarily less likely to reach out to the African American community. I have worked with lots of financial advisors over the years who have large practices, largely comprised of African Americans. I think it depends. I do think financial advisors are one place, though, that African Americans can go. I think African Americans go to the same place that everybody else goes to for financial advice through you're either a financial advisor, and it depends on how you define a financial advisor, whether it's your stockbroker, whether it's your insurance agent, where it's any number of folks. But I think the same resources that are available for everyone in the population are really equally available for African Americans. So some of the challenges that we have, though, are the ones that we've been talking about this whole session. Since account balances tend to be less, since financial advisors are paid based on assets under management, there will be the perception among some people that the market is not attractive enough because, everybody reads the same data. So, everything you're hearing, other people, are hearing. So, so it is an issue. However, I don't think it's an insurmountable issue at all. I think there are always good people out there who want to do business with good people.
This is the only point I'm going to differ with Keith a little bit on. And the studies I've seen, and certainly the study we released when I was at Prudential, suggests that there was a difference in terms of the level of connectedness that African Americans had to the financial advisory world, that financial advisors were less likely to contact African American families, Hispanic families, than they were majority families, which I think is an opportunity for the financial sector to really get behind and to really build those networks. The other thing they found is that African Americans were more likely to trust information that they got from churches and other networks and advisors. So again, I think there's a role for the church. I do think that, and I actually did this myself because I hope this question would come up. People always ask, well, what can I do? I want an advisor. I would say that there's a lot of resources out there for you. And I actually made calls yesterday to make sure this worked before I give it to you. So the DOL actually the Department of Labor has a project underway now to raise the level of fiduciary responsibility that advisors would have, which I think is a very important project. The SEC also has a project to harmonize the fiduciary responsibility that advisors have versus broker-dealers. I think it's important to understand how the advisor gets paid. You want to understand, does the advisor get paid to sell? Do they get paid based on the assets? If they get paid to sell, you have to ask, am I in a conversation where I'm being sold? If they're getting paid to grow assets, what you want to make sure of is that your interests are aligned, right? You want to make sure that the advisor that's advising you has interests that are aligned. With respect to registered investment advisors, you can call the state. It's the National Association of State Securities Administrators, NASAA.org. And I called the state, I live in the state of Virginia. I called my state regulator yesterday, and I said I would like a list of all the registered investment advisors, those who are paid to give advice in the state of Virginia. And I like that list. And I got connected to somebody within minutes. He said, I'll have the list out to you within an amount of days. I haven't gotten the list, but I'm here to tell you that those are calls I would encourage you to make. This is what your tax revenue goes to support. But you do want people who are paid to give advice and who are paid to advise. And I would say, if they're only paid to sell, you really want to understand the nature of that relationship to make sure that your interests are aligned. But there are places you can go. The SEC, I actually was on the SEC website yesterday, and I thought they had some terrific information on selecting an advisor, questions to ask. As I said, the Department of Labor has some great stuff on this. And I know the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is starting to really get focused on these issues as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll now open it up for questions by the audience. Yes. And I think you would need to come to the mics.
Please.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. Sean, that could not have been a better segue to the question and the comment that I wanted to make. My name is Todd Cranford, and I work with the Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards. And so the question that you asked and the issue that you just brought to our attention is one that we've been looking at for a number of years. I wanted to ask the panelists whether or not you're aware of any empirical data, because we've got data that suggests generally across all races and ethnicities and gender that people who use financial advisors tend to do better. The one issue that we really haven't talked about in terms of disparities is the one that I think is probably the hardest to get over, and that's the psychological. I mean, we've talked about the educational, but speaking from personal experience, as several years ago, I tried to get my father to understand his finances a little better. I had to get over a hurdle, and many other people may have to do that as well, not only in just allowing me, but anyone to help him with his finances. So one, I applaud you for saying, yes, there are definitely resources, cfpboard.org, that can help you find qualified financial planners who operate under the fiduciary standard that Michael was just talking about, and that's the end of my shameless plug. But I would be interested in knowing whether or not you're aware of any data or strategies that can help us get over the psychological barrier that other communities don't necessarily have.
Yeah, I certainly feel what you're talking about. And, you know, this is funny. When during a period where I was, I probably had, I don't know, a few hundred financial planners who worked in my organization, and I was visiting my parents, and I was talking to my father, and my mother had laid everything out, and I'm like, okay, Dad, you need to do this. I think you need to do this, and this. And, you know, he's looking at me like, well, you know, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I said, I don't know much about many things, but this is one thing that I do know something about. If you don't listen to me about anything else, listen about just this one thing, just one or two things. And it was something really basic. It wasn't complex. And you know, he looked at me like I had, you know, 10 heads. So you know, I'm hoping that as the community becomes more sophisticated, that it isn't the challenge today that it was, I don't know, 10 years ago or more. You know, I mean, I had a great-grandfather who never felt that any bank was as safe as his pillow. I mean, so clearly, I mean, there's a cultural component where, first of all, you have to trust the individual. I think that's the most thing and important thing. And every piece of data that I've seen across every ethnic group says that the most important part in forming a relationship with a trusted advisor is trust. The person does not have to be the same ethnicity as you. I mean, it can help, but it's not essential at all. The important thing is that you're able to form a trusting relationship. Right. I think that's the first step to get over that barrier.
Because exactly what Michael was talking about, we are not trained to do this ourselves. We don't get it in school. Financial advisors obviously are trained through academics and experience, and they take on that responsibility. You know, it's been my mission to try to encourage people in that direction, because even well-established, smart people who work in financial services don't have the time to invest. Even if you have the intellect to be able to do it, you don't have the time. I know I don't have the time, nor do I have the desire. You know, and so that's why I think it's important to find somebody that not only knows what they're talking about, that you can build that trust relationship with, which may only happen over time, but we have to convince people, particularly in our community, to look in that direction and to be able to trust people who look like us.
Well, that's certainly true. And we also, though, have to train advisors need, a lot of times, I think, training to understand that people are going to be suspicious of you. And it has nothing to do with you. It's not personal. It's because of conditioning. And you're going to have to work that much harder to form that relationship.
Okay. Next.
My name is J.B. Bryan, and I own a registered investment advisory firm. And I was the first Black person to start a registered investment advisory firm in the Richmond, Virginia area, and possibly for the state. I am so thankful that you acknowledge registered investment advisors, because so many people have no idea what that is. So when they don't know the effort and the compliance issues that I have to go through versus some people that you're probably working with. And a lot has changed. I've spent a lot of money on legal documents that people have no idea when they're working with me how protected they are, and people like me. And I just want to take this moment to see if there's any other black financial advisors in the room. I know there was one brother that was there, and you as well. But Prudential's report noted that our community does not have a commitment to working with people like themselves. It pointed out that black people don't really care what their advisors look like. Now, as a person who has committed my entire career to helping people that look like me, now I went to the University of Virginia and I didn't have to do that. I didn't. I started at Wheat First as a stockbroker, the only black person in the room. I didn't have to spend, the last 20 years, more than 20 years of my life committed to us. And I think that we at least owe it to yourself to consider talking to someone that looks like you. A lot of the problem that we have with our financial empowerment is that we don't take the time to find legitimate people like you to set an example for your kids. So then you lose a sense of confidence. They lose a sense of confidence that it's possible for them to do it. I deal with every day people telling me, I told so-and-so about you, but they said they're not gonna deal with a black person. That is sad. That is sad, but it's real. And what I say to them is that we never have to spend any time addressing that issue, because that means that they don't think they're intelligent enough for somebody else to be intelligent enough to help them. So that's the challenge. And I look past the research, because the reality of it is that it's not the kids, it's the adults that have the challenge. When they talk about the sandwich, that we have generations that have not had the opportunity to sit down and talk to somebody because people that didn't look like them didn't want them in their firm. In my lifetime, I had to sit down with a black lady that said they wouldn't let my husband set up an account with the firm you now work at, little black girl. And I just wanted you to come in here and know that I keep all my stock certificates in here, in my house, because they wouldn't let us be at that firm. So when they talk about how broke we are, it's because most of us are first generation. We haven't even been welcomed into it. So it's not that you got your government job and you're not really participating. It's just that you came out of college in negative. And that's the reality of it. Is I came out of college with a loan, and my father has a PhD. Think about people that came out of college with loans, and their parents, they're not, you know what I mean? I was second generation college graduate. You're talking about people coming out with loans, no education. So it's past what Prudential took with these 1,000 people that they got this research on, and we got to stay in touch with the reality of it. Is we can't get financial education from your church. They don't know what they're talking about. I have so many people that have been robbed from going to church trying to find out from an insurance agent about investments. We have to go past that, and I love the Lord, and I'm committed to it, but the church is not the place. That's why it's not listed with the state as where you go and get financial advice. We need to go past those things, and they're not going to find it in the research documents. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize for my compassion.
No, yes,
wait a second. Wait a second. But what I'm expressing here, I'm recording, is something that you're not going to get. So if I die today, I got to share this with you, that I've given my career to servicing us, and the challenges that aren't shown there go back generations, and somebody needs to share that and tell the truth about it, that we need to take a moment and really think about, why is the debt the major issue for our community? And it's because our generation is inheriting a lot of debt and not assets.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. We have time just for one more question.
As many of you know, and as you have said, most of us will rely on Social Security as our retirement benefit. My question for Michael and Keith is, and we hear conflicting reports on this, is Social Security going to go broke?
From the government, you go first, but the answer is no.
So, you know, that's it's not a political question at all. The Labor Department, the Labor Secretary is a member of the Social Security Board of Trustees, and actually it's the can't recall, but member of the Social Security Board of Trustees. The Social Security is not in danger of going broke in the near term. Matter of fact, they extended the date by which Social Security will be solvent into, and I forget what year it is. Ed probably knows better than I do these days. There is a question about over the long term, right? So 20, 30 years out, will Social Security be there for us? Because you have a lot of people that will be in retirement mode and not as people who are sort of in the labor force. So I think there are long-term structural questions about Social Security, right? So should we raise the retirement age, for instance? I think there are a lot of structural things that we can do to enhance the security of Social Security. But so if people are concerned about it going broke in the near term, I think that those concerns are far exceed the actual factual support that Social Security has. What we're talking about is decades away, right? But there are things that we can do today and that people are doing today to make sure that it is there in the longer term. But I would say in the very near term, no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not an issue for you. Chances are. I mean, and think about it. I mean, the structural issues are just that, structural issues that can be worked on over time. So any structural issues that exist, there's time to fix it. So it's not like, you know, I think we should be seeing red right now.
Okay, this concludes our session, and I would like to thank both Keith and also Michael for this very thought-provoking session. And also keep in mind that there are many critical and substantial issues out there confronting the African American community and other representative groups. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.